Wait, did your bank suddenly text you to verify your identity, ask for a new document, or warn that a transfer could be delayed, and you thought, that's weird, I've had this account for years? Because a new banking rule change just hit, and it's the kind that doesn't feel like a rule at all until your money is the thing that gets stuck. And the biggest surprise is what happens to seniors over 60 and people who weren't born in the US. Stay with me, because what looks like routine security can turn into an account hold at the worst possible moment. Here's what's actually going on. The new change isn't one single law that says, starting Monday, we freeze accounts. That's not how it reads. The real change is that federal regulators and the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, have been updating how banks can meet identity verification requirements, especially around the tax ID number, the TIN, that's tied to you. When banks adjust their internal systems to match that updated guidance, you feel it as more verification prompts, more, we need one more thing, and sometimes slower access to funds until the bank feels comfortable they know the true identity of the customer. That know your customer concept is built right into the federal customer identification program rules that banks follow. Source. Now, why are people saying it was approved overnight? Because a lot of these changes don't come with the kind of big public countdown you'd expect. Regulators issue orders, exemptions, and rule adjustments. Banks then roll out policy updates fast, sometimes within days, because compliance deadlines, audits, and risk models don't wait. Reuters has described this broader pattern in financial crime rules. Changes can go into effect immediately, even while public comment periods are still happening, and banks don't want to be caught on the wrong side of enforcement. Source. So, what specifically changed that matters to your checking account this week? FinCEN issued an order that gives banks more flexibility in how they obtain a customer's TIN, your taxpayer identification number. In plain English, banks may now be allowed, in certain cases, to collect your tax ID information from a third-party source instead of only directly from you, as long as the bank still complies with the overall identity verification requirements. It's optional for banks, but when a bank adopts this, it usually comes with new automated verification checks, meaning your account activity can get flagged because the system wants to match identity signals across databases. Source. And let me tell you why that matters. When banks get permission to modernize how they gather and confirm identity data, they don't just do it quietly in the background. They build new workflows, new alerts, new pop-ups, new "we couldn't verify you" screens, new rules about what happens when something doesn't match perfectly. And that's where regular people get caught off guard. Because in the real world, identities are messy, addresses change, names are formatted differently, a passport expires, a green card gets renewed, a social security recipient moves in with family, a retiree stops driving and their license expires. A new immigrant uses different versions of their name on different documents. That's why seniors and retirees are getting hit harder than they expect. If you're retired, you tend to live on predictable income. Social security hits, a pension hits, maybe a VA deposit, then your bills come out. There's not a lot of wiggle room for processing delays. So when a bank suddenly says, we need to verify you, what they're really saying is, our system needs to confirm you're you before we let certain things process the same way. And the next part is where people over 60 get blindsided. Because older adults are also disproportionately targeted by fraud, and banks know it, the CFPB has a whole set of resources about protecting older adults from fraud and exploitation. And one of the realities is that banks are watching for unusual patterns to prevent scams, even if it frustrates legitimate customers. So if you're a senior and your pattern changes even a little, new caregiver helping you, new online login, larger than usual withdrawal, wire transfer to a new friend, gift cards, crypto, sudden Zelle transfers. Banks may slow things down and ask questions. The intent can be protection. The experience can feel like punishment. Source. Now let's talk about Social Security recipients specifically, because this is where fear spreads fast. No, this rule does not mean your Social Security is ending. It does not mean banks can just take your direct deposit. But if your bank account goes into a verification status, if the bank system thinks it can't fully confirm identity, or it sees suspicious signals, then the practical effect can be delayed access to funds, temporary holds on outgoing transfers, or extra steps to change anything about your account. So if you're someone who was planning to change direct deposit, add a joint owner, update an address, switch banks, or even just deposit a larger check than normal this week, that's where you can feel the friction. Because the federal rule banks follow is very clear about the concept. Banks have to obtain identifying information and use risk-based procedures to verify identity, and if they can't form a reasonable belief, they know who the customer is. The bank has procedures for what happens next, sometimes including not opening an account, limiting use, or even closing an account after failed verification attempts. That language is in the federal CIP rule itself. Source. Now, what about immigrants and green card holders? Most immigrants don't realize this rule can affect them too because they hear tax identification number and think, that's just taxes. But in banking, that number is identity infrastructure. It's how systems match you across records. It's how banks reduce money laundering risk. It's how they decide whether you're verified instantly or whether you go into manual review. For immigrants, the challenge is that non-US person identification can involve different documents. Under the CIP requirements, banks can use items like a passport number and country of issuance, an alien identification card number, or another government-issued document with a photo safeguard. That means green card holders may be asked to provide documentation that a US-born customer never gets asked for. And if the bank's new systems aren't matching cleanly, you can get extra verification requests that feel sudden and personal. Source. And I need you to hear this clearly. Getting asked for verification does not automatically mean you did something wrong. It can mean the bank's system changed. It can mean the bank is tightening controls. It can mean your information doesn't match perfectly in the background, but it can still lead to real consequences if you ignore it. So what changes might you notice in your bank account this week? You might notice you can't raise your transfer limits without calling. You might notice your mobile deposit gets pending longer than usual. You might notice a "we need more information" banner in your app. You might notice your bank asks you to reconfirm your social security number or ITIN or re-upload an ID. You might notice your bank stops letting you do certain actions online and forces you into a branch or a video call. And the most stressful one, you try to send money or pay a bill and it says it's under review. Now, what mistakes can trigger account holds, delays, or extra verification? This is the part that makes people mad because the mistakes often look like normal life. A name mismatch, like your account is Maria D. Santos, but your ID says Maria del Carmen Santos. An address mismatch. You moved, you updated USPS, you updated your doctor, but you didn't update the bank, or you updated it online and it didn't fully verify. Expired ID. Seniors stop driving all the time. A driver's license expires. Then suddenly the bank can't use it as a clean identity document. Logging in from a new device in a new location, visiting family, moving states, even just buying a new phone. Large, out-of-pattern transfers, especially if they're going to a new recipient, adding a joint owner or changing beneficiaries and signers without the documentation the bank wants. And for immigrants, presenting documents that are valid but unfamiliar to a frontline employee or a system that expects a different format. Now let's get very practical. What might banks require now in real life? According to the FDIC, banks are required to collect certain identifying information prior to opening an account, things like name, date of birth, address, and an identification number. And they need procedures designed to verify identity and form a reasonable belief they know who the customer is. That's the core of all of this. Source. So the real examples of what banks may require can look like this. They might require you to come into a branch with an unexpired government-issued photo ID. They might require a passport plus proof of address if you don't have a standard state ID. They might ask for your green card number or alien identification number, depending on your status and what they need to verify. They might ask you to confirm your TIN SSN ITIN and then cross check it with third party databases, especially now that FinCEN has explicitly permitted a third party method for obtaining TIN information under certain conditions. Source. They might require a selfie identity check in the app. They might require a live video verification. They might require you to answer out of wallet questions, those weird questions like which street you lived on in 2009. They might require proof of source of funds for an unusual deposit or transfer, depending on the bank and the risk. And listen, this is the part everyone misses. It's not always about opening a new account. When a bank updates its compliance systems, existing customers can get swept into re-verification if something looks inconsistent, risky, or simply incomplete. Now, what should you do immediately to protect yourself? First, don't panic transfer all your money out in one shot. That's the kind of behavior that can make systems even more suspicious. Slow down. Second, sign into your bank app and check if there are any messages, alerts, or actions required. If the bank is asking for verification, time matters. The longer you wait, the more likely a restriction gets placed automatically. Third, make sure your core identity information matches across your documents and your bank profile. Full legal name, current address, date of birth, and your identification number on file. Fourth, if you're a senior, set up a trusted contact plan in your own life. Not because you're powerless, but because scams are real and banks are more likely to pause transactions when they suspect exploitation. The CFPB emphasizes planning and protective steps for older adults. And it's not just theory. Banks are actually building these protections into how they handle accounts. Source. Fifth, if you're an immigrant or green card holder, keep your immigration documents current and easy to access. If your card is renewed, if your passport changed, if your name format changed, be proactive with your bank before you need to move money quickly. And here's the step I promised I'd give you at the end. The one step that prevents banking problems instantly for most people. Call your bank using the number on the back of your debit card and ask one simple question. Is there any identity verification, CIP, or compliance flag on my profile that could restrict transfers or deposits this week? Not, is my account okay? They'll just say yes. Ask specifically whether there's a verification hold, a pending documentation request, or a profile mismatch. Because if you catch it early, it's usually a quick fix. If you catch it the day your rent is due, it becomes a crisis. Now, before we wrap up, I want to address something that scammers are already doing with this news. They will pretend to be your bank. They will say, due to the new federal rule, we need your login code. No legitimate bank rep should ask for your full password. No legitimate bank rep should ask you to read back a one-time code that was texted to you for login. So if you get a call like that, hang up, flip your card over, and call the real number. Because these rule changes create the perfect cover story for fraud. And that's why this matters so much for seniors, retirees, Social Security recipients, and immigrant families, people who often have the most to lose from a sudden disruption and the least room for error. So here's what I want you to do right now. If this helped you understand what's happening, hit like, because the more this gets shared, the fewer people get blindsided. Subscribe if you want weekly updates like this, in plain English, without the fear-mongering, but without sugarcoating it either. And comment below, have you noticed new verification prompts, transfer delays, or pending review messages from your bank recently? And please, share this with one senior in your life and one immigrant family you care about. Because the people who get hurt the most are the ones who find out after the account is already restricted, and they're standing at the pharmacy counter or the grocery checkout or trying to pay a bill, feeling embarrassed and scared. Nobody deserves that. Stay alert, stay ahead of it, and I'll keep you updated.